Caroline Whitman believed she was living inside a fairy tale. At 38, she was a published author in Manhattan. Her life framed by the charm of a brownstone apartment and the steady devotion of her husband, Mark. He was a financial consultant with an air of composure that soothed her. Even the way he spoke her name, Caroline, soft and deliberate, felt like a promise. Every morning began with a kiss on her forehead and a cup of coffee made exactly the way she liked it. Every night ended with his whispered words, "You're my world." For years, she believed him without hesitation. She believed in their love as if it were unshakable truth. But one night, close to midnight, she awoke to an empty bed. She reached across the sheets, expecting warmth, but found nothing. At first she thought little of it. Perhaps he had gone downstairs for a glass of water or to check something in his office. She rolled onto her side, willing herself back to sleep. Then she heard it, his voice. Low, calculated, serious. The sound carried through the quiet apartment from his office. She stilled, her heart quickening. "She doesn't suspect anything," Mark murmured. Caroline froze. The air thickened around her, pressing down on her chest. "Almost done," he added. A chill spread down her spine. With quiet steps, she slid from the bed, pressing herself against the hallway wall, the sliver of light beneath his office door stretching across the floor like a warning. She leaned close, straining to hear more, but she had heard enough. Minutes later, she lay back in bed, her body rigid, pretending to sleep when Mark returned. He slipped under the covers with practiced calm, pulling the blanket over her as if nothing had shattered. Caroline stared at the ceiling all night, her world collapsing in silence. When dawn broke, the morning carried none of its usual warmth. Caroline moved through the kitchen like a ghost, her hands trembling as she reached for the coffee pot. Behind her, the apartment felt both familiar and foreign, as if every corner now held a secret. Mark was still asleep upstairs, his breathing steady and peaceful, but her own chest felt heavy. She glanced at her phone resting on the counter. For years, she had never questioned him, never once checked their financial accounts. He had always handled everything: bills, savings, investments. She had thought it was what a good wife did, trust her husband without doubt. But the memory of his whispered words from the night before burned in her mind. She doesn't suspect anything. She swallowed hard and opened the banking app. Her pulse spiked as the numbers flashed across the screen. Transaction after transaction appeared. 500 here, 1,000 there, 2,000 more. Dozens of withdrawals, small enough to avoid alarm but relentless in pattern. Together, they painted a sinister picture. Her grip tightened on the counter. Then came his voice behind her. "Checking the account this early." Mark's tone was light, almost teasing, but she caught the flicker of surprise in his eyes as he leaned against the doorway, rubbing his neck. Caroline forced a smile. "Just curious. Some of these charges look unfamiliar." He walked to the coffee maker, pouring himself a cup with calm precision. "Oh, those," he said casually. "Just a few small investments. I must have forgotten to mention them." He sipped, avoiding her gaze. Inside, something colder than anger stirred within her. She nodded slowly, feigning acceptance, but her trust had cracked. And through that crack poured clarity. That evening, Caroline's eyes sharpened to details she had once ignored. Mark was on his phone constantly, turning it face down whenever she entered the room, stepping outside to take calls, smiling easily when she asked questions. "Just business," he would say, brushing her concern aside. But the unease within her was no longer passive worry. It was resolve. She wasn't going to wait for his plan to unfold. She needed answers. 2 nights later the opportunity came. After dinner, Mark announced he was going to shower. Normally, his phone clung to him like a second skin, never left unattended. But this time he left it on the dining table. Caroline's eyes fixed on it, her heart hammering. She waited, listening for the sound of water upstairs. 30 seconds. Then she reached for the phone. To her shock, it was unlocked. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through his messages. Most were harmless exchanges with colleagues. But then one thread stood out. No name, only a number. The latest message chilled her blood. Send her the Ilium files. Just make sure she stays in the dark. Almost done. Caroline's vision blurred. Or did that mean her? Was she the one being kept in the dark? She placed the phone back exactly where he had left it, careful not to disturb a thing. In the kitchen, she splashed cold water on her face, gripping the counter to steady herself. The sound of the shower still thundered upstairs, but inside, everything had changed. Mark wasn't just hiding money. He wasn't just keeping secrets. He was planning something bigger, and she was at the center of it. When Mark returned to bed that night, his routine was flawless. He kissed Caroline's forehead, whispered goodnight, and pulled her close. His breathing slowed, steady and rehearsed, but Caroline's eyes remained open in the dark. She smiled faintly when he asked, "You okay?" But inside her thoughts screamed. He had no idea she had seen the message, no idea that she was no longer in the dark. That was his mistake. She decided then she wouldn't confront him, not yet. Let him believe she was blind. Let him move forward with his plan. The next morning, as soon as Mark left for work, Caroline picked up her phone with trembling hands. There was only one person she could trust: Anna Prescott. Anna wasn't just her best friend from college. She was now a sharp estate attorney, someone who had built her career on protecting assets and dismantling lies. Caroline dialed, her voice shaking as she explained everything. The midnight whispers, the secret transactions, the message about the Ilium files. Anna didn't interrupt, not once. She listened until Caroline finished, her silence heavy with calculation. Then her voice came through, calm but firm. "How much money are we talking?" Caroline hesitated. The figure left her lips in a whisper. "Close to 500 million. There was a long pause, the weight of the number settling in. Finally, Anna's tone sharpened. "Caroline, we need to move your assets now. If you wait, he'll make his next move first." Caroline sat down on the edge of the couch, her knees weak. She had trusted Mark with everything, never questioning his control. But trust had become her greatest vulnerability. Now, with Anna's guidance, she was about to take it back. The next 72 hours blurred into a storm of papers, signatures, and whispered phone calls. Caroline barely ate, barely slept, moving from one document to the next as Anna orchestrated a fortress of protection. They transferred the apartment title into a trust, locked down the investment accounts, and rerouted her royalties from her books into her sole control. Every asset she had, her savings, her investments, her intellectual property, shifted into legal shelters Mark could never touch. Anna moved with the efficiency of a general at war, her team securing each corner of Caroline's financial world. Caroline signed page after page, her hands trembling but her resolve unshaken. On the third day, as dusk settled over Manhattan, she sat alone in her brownstone, the air heavy with anticipation. When Mark walked in, carrying takeout and wearing his charming smile, she felt an odd calm. He set the bag down on the table, kissed her cheek lightly. "Thought we'd have Thai tonight," he said cheerfully, unaware of the empire she had just shifted beyond his reach. Caroline nodded, taking the bag. Her eyes betrayed nothing. He laughed about traffic, asked if she had eaten, and carried on with his routine as though nothing had changed. But Caroline knew everything had changed. Her assets were untouchable. Her world, once vulnerable, was now shielded by law. She had built walls he could not see, and she wasn't going to warn him. She would let him believe she was still blind. Let him take the next step. Because this time she would be ready. 4 nights later, Mark revealed his hand. It was a Friday evening when he came home earlier than usual. His suit pressed, his briefcase in hand, and his expression calm, almost smug. He kissed Caroline on the cheek, then sat across from her at the dining table, sliding a folder across the polished wood. "We need to talk," he said. She opened it slowly. Inside lay divorce papers. Mark leaned back, his voice steady, rehearsed. "I think it's for the best. We've grown apart. I don't want things to get messy. Caroline studied his face, then lifted her gaze, her expression unreadable. Really? She asked. For a flicker of a second, his confidence wavered, but he quickly regained it. Yes. It's better this way. Caroline closed the folder gently and pushed it back toward him. Her voice was calm, measured. Before we go any further, there's something you should know. His brows furrowed. What? Caroline leaned forward, her eyes steady. I've already moved everything. The apartment, the accounts, the royalties. They're all protected in a trust now. You can't touch any of it. The color drained from Mark's face. He sat back, his mouth opening and closing, searching for words. What do you mean? I mean, Caroline replied, her tone sharper. You don't get to walk in here, hand me papers and take half of my life. That part of the story is over. His jaw clenched, his knuckles white against the folder. You can't do that. Caroline's voice cut through the tension. I already did. Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. Finally Mark rose, his voice cold. We'll see each other in court. Caroline stood too, a faint smile on her lips. Then go ahead. Try. The first time in weeks, Caroline felt the faintest breath of relief. Mark now knew he could not manipulate her so easily. But peace was short-lived. 3 days after he stormed out with his divorce papers, Caroline noticed whispers at work. At first, it was subtle. Colleagues exchanging glances, conversations that stopped when she entered the room. But soon the unease thickened. One afternoon, her assistant Rachel walked in, her face pale as she clutched a printout. You need to see this, she whispered. Caroline took the paper, her hands tightening as her eyes scanned the words. It was a post from an anonymous online forum. CFO hides funds during divorce using company money. The accusation was vague, but the comments below made it pointed. I know who it is. Caroline Whitman. Look into her. Her blood ran cold. Mark. Had to be him. She looked at Rachel, her voice barely audible. He's trying to ruin me. Rachel nodded gravely. If this spreads, it could damage your reputation. Or worse. Caroline rose from her chair, pacing the office as the printout shook in her hands. For years, she had built her career carefully, with integrity. She had earned every step, every success. And now, with a single lie, Mark was trying to tear it down. Her stomach churned, but her resolve only deepened. I need to call Anna, she said, her voice steadying. This was no longer just about a marriage unraveling. This was war. That evening, Caroline sat in Anna's office, her nerves stretched taut. The city lights glittered through the tall windows as Anna leaned back in her chair, listening intently. Caroline laid out the events, her words spilling faster with every breath. The online forum, the accusations, the unmistakable fingerprints of Mark's malice. Anna's expression hardened, her hands folding together. He's playing dirty, she said firmly. He wants to scare you into a settlement. He wants you rattled enough to compromise. Caroline's voice cracked with both fury and determination. He's trying to destroy me, not just personally but professionally. He wants me humiliated. Anna tapped her pen against the desk, thinking quickly. Then we respond. First step, a cease and desist letter. If he spreads another lie, we sue for defamation and reputational harm. We'll make it clear he's the one at risk. Caroline felt a spark of hope ignite, fragile but real. Mark believed she would bend under pressure. He believed he could box her into fear and force her hand. But he had underestimated her once again. She straightened in her chair, her voice calm but resolute. Then let's fight back. Anna gave a sharp nod. Good. We'll fight. And we'll win. But Mark wasn't finished. 3 days later, Anna called Caroline back into her office. Her tone on the phone was clipped, urgent. You need to come now. When Caroline arrived, Anna slid a folder across the desk. Her voice was flat, controlled. He just filed a lawsuit. Caroline's breath caught. What? He's accusing you of financial fraud, Anna said grimly. He claims you illegally moved marital assets. He's alleging embezzlement from your joint accounts. Caroline sank into the chair, her chest tight. He can't be serious. Anna's eyes were sharp. He is. And there's more. She opened the folder, pointing to another name. He filed with a co-plaintiff. Caroline's eyes scanned the page, then froze. The name hit her like a strike. Iliamro. The word she had seen in the message on Mark's phone. Who is he? She whispered. Anna's lips pressed thin. A known fraudster. Never convicted but tied to forged documents in several cases. Dangerous. Caroline flipped through the papers, her hands trembling. The documents were detailed, filled with numbers, charts, even signatures that looked like her own. She shook her head violently. These aren't mine. These are fabrications. Anna nodded. We know. But we'll have to prove it. Caroline's fear hardened into fire. He wasn't just trying to take her money anymore. He was trying to bury her in lies. She clenched her fists, her voice steady. Then let's make those lies collapse on him. The days that followed turned into a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and sleepless nights. Caroline sat across from Anna and her team, combing through every document Mark had submitted. The fraudulent numbers were bold, almost arrogant in their detail. Some showed transactions that had never occurred. Others included copies of signatures meant to be hers, each one just slightly off, letters shaped wrong, strokes too clean. Caroline slammed one file shut, her voice trembling with anger. These are lies. Anyone who knows my signature would see it. Anna leaned forward, calm but unyielding. The court won't take your word. We need evidence. We need to prove the trail leads back to them. She turned to the forensic finance expert she had hired, a wiry man with sharp eyes named Daniel Cross. He spoke with quiet certainty. Give me a week. I'll trace every document, every footprint. If they forged it, I'll find where it came from. Caroline nodded, her chest tight but her resolve fierce. She couldn't collapse now. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was her name, her reputation, her right to stand unbroken. For the next 7 days, Caroline lived in the trenches of the battle. Her mornings began with coffee and stacks of records. Afternoons blurred into tense meetings with Anna's team. At night, she paced her apartment, her mind refusing rest. Daniel worked tirelessly, tracing digital trails and cross-checking signatures. On the 3rd day, he leaned over a spreadsheet, tapping a column with his pen. See here. These supposed withdrawals were logged on dates when the account was locked for security checks. Impossible. Caroline exhaled shakily, hope flickering. On the 5th day, Daniel uncovered more. This file path traces back to Iliamro's firm. Look at the metadata. He didn't even scrub it properly. Caroline's eyes widened. Proof. Actual proof. By the 7th day, Daniel had assembled a portfolio of evidence showing the forged documents for what they were. Crude imitations, patched together with false numbers and mismatched dates. Caroline sat across from Anna, staring at the growing pile of truth. He tried to bury me, she whispered. Anna's expression softened only slightly. Then let's make sure he ends up buried under his own lies. The courtroom was colder than Caroline expected, its silence pressing against her skin as she sat beside Anna. She wore a navy suit, her shoulders squared, her hands steady on the table, though inside her heart raced. Across the aisle, Mark looked like a man unraveling beneath his tailored suit. His jaw tight, his eyes restless. Beside him sat an empty chair, the one reserved for Iliamro. He hadn't shown up. When the judge entered, everyone rose, the air heavy with anticipation. Anna's presentation was sharp, methodical, slicing through the false claims one by one. Daniel's expert testimony cut deeper, pointing out the impossibilities, the mismatched data, the metadata linking everything back to Iliamro. Caroline sat still, her gaze fixed ahead, refusing to let her eyes meet Mark's. When the judge leaned back, reviewing the evidence, time seemed to stretch endlessly. Then came the words. The plaintiff's claims are dismissed. The trust remains protected. Legal fees are to be covered by the plaintiff. Caroline closed her eyes, not in joy but in release. Mark had thrown everything at her, and still the truth stood stronger. When the gavel struck and the hearing adjourned, the sound echoed like thunder in Caroline's chest. Mark's face drained of color, his jaw twitching as he gathered his papers in silence. Caroline rose calmly, her posture tall, her eyes unflinching. As she stepped into the hallway, he followed, his voice low, venomous. You didn't have to do this, he hissed. Caroline stopped, turned to face him, and for the first time in their marriage, her gaze was steel. No, Mark, she said evenly. You didn't have to do this. For a moment, the man she once loved flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by anger and defeat. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step a declaration of freedom. Outside the courthouse, Anna placed a hand on her shoulder. It's over, she said. Caroline nodded, though she knew the wounds inside her would take longer to heal. Winning in court didn't erase the betrayal. But it proved one thing. She was no longer a victim in his game. She was her own shield. The weeks that followed unfolded slowly, cautiously. Caroline returned to her writing desk, where the blank page once felt like an ally but now stared back at her like a mirror of her fractured world. At first, the words refused to come. Her fingers hovered over the keys, her mind replaying courtroom scenes, whispered lies, and the midnight voice that had first shattered her peace. But little by little, sentences emerged. She began walking in Central Park in the mornings, breathing in the crisp air, letting her thoughts settle. The whispers at work faded as the truth spread, and Mark's smear campaign crumbled under legal weight. Rachel returned to her desk with a smile instead of worry. Slowly, normalcy crept back into Caroline's days, but it wasn't the same normal as before. It was different, quieter, sharper, forged in fire. When Anna invited her for coffee one afternoon, Caroline laughed genuinely for the first time in months. You survived the storm, Anna said. Caroline stirred her cup, watching the steam rise. I didn't just survive, she murmured. I learned. Caroline sat by the window of her apartment one evening, the city lights painting the glass with reflections. She wasn't celebrating, not in the way people expected. Victory didn't feel like champagne or fireworks. It felt like silence after thunder, like air returning after being held underwater. She reflected on everything. The love she had once believed in, the lies that unraveled it, the fortress she built to protect what was hers. Trust, she realized, had been her greatest gift and her greatest risk. Never again would she hand over her power blindly. Mark had taken her fairy tale and tried to twist it into her downfall, but she had rewritten the ending. Picking up her journal, she wrote one line across the page. Strength isn't surviving the storm. It's learning how to own the sky afterward. She closed the book, her chest lighter than it had been in months. For the first time, she felt something close to peace. Not because the past was forgotten, but because she had faced it and chosen not to be broken. Caroline's peace grew in small, fragile steps, but something inside her whispered that her journey wasn't meant to stay private. One evening, while scrolling through her messages, she found dozens of unread notes from readers who had followed her earlier books. They asked when her next novel would come, when she would share her voice again. For the first time, she considered that her story, the real one, raw and unpolished, might be the one she needed to tell. Sitting at her desk, she began to type, not as an author escaping into fiction, but as a woman speaking her truth. She wrote about betrayal, about hidden bank accounts, about midnight whispers that broke her world in two. The words poured out like water through a broken dam. By dawn, she had written 10 pages, her fingers aching but her heart strangely lighter. When she shared a short excerpt anonymously online, the response was immediate. Comments flooded in. This is my story too. Thank you for putting it into words. Caroline stared at the screen, her chest tightening with a mix of fear and relief. She had once felt utterly alone. Now she wasn't. Encouraged by the responses, Caroline decided to share more. She crafted her posts carefully, blending storytelling with lessons she had learned. Never surrender full control, never confuse love with blind trust, always protect your future. Each piece resonated with strangers who recognized themselves in her journey. Messages arrived from women across the country. Wives, professionals, mothers, some whispering about financial betrayal, others about emotional scars. Caroline replied to as many as she could, her heart aching but also strengthening with each story. One evening, Rachel stopped by her office, holding her phone. "Caroline," she said softly, "your words are everywhere. People are calling this the Whitman stand." Caroline blinked in surprise. The phrase spread across forums, hashtags, and articles. Reporters reached out wanting interviews. She hesitated at first, nervous about turning her private pain into public discourse. But Anna reminded her. "He tried to silence you. Now you get to choose your voice." Caroline nodded. She was no longer just surviving. She was shaping something bigger than herself. Her first public interview was nerve-wracking. Sitting under bright studio lights, facing a journalist whose questions cut straight to the heart, Caroline steadied her breathing. "You could have stayed quiet," the interviewer began. "Why share this now?" Caroline folded her hands in her lap, her gaze steady. "Because silence protects the wrong person," she replied. "When women are kept in the dark, when trust is exploited, we're told it's weakness to speak. I refuse that. My story isn't just about me. It's about anyone who's been blindsided by betrayal and forced to rebuild." The studio fell silent for a beat, the weight of her words hanging heavy. The interview aired the following week, and the response overwhelmed her inbox. She received invitations to speak at conferences, to write opinion columns, to lead discussions about financial independence in marriage. For the first time since Mark's betrayal, Caroline felt a sense of purpose burning brighter than fear. She hadn't chosen the storm, but she had chosen what to do after it. And that choice, she realized, was her real power. Caroline soon found herself standing on stages she never imagined. At her first conference, rows of women filled the hall, some clutching notebooks, others simply staring at her with wide, hopeful eyes. She adjusted the microphone, her hands trembling for just a moment before she steadied herself. "I'm not here as an expert," she began. "I'm here as someone who learned the hard way that love should never cost you your freedom." Murmurs swept through the audience, soft sighs of recognition. Caroline told them about the midnight whispers, the financial betrayals, the forged documents meant to crush her. But she also spoke of the fortress she built with Anna, of the trust that protected her assets, of the courage it took to face the man she once loved in court. The room grew silent, every eye fixed on her. When she finished, a young woman raised her hand, her voice breaking. "How do you know when to stop trusting?" Caroline's answer was gentle but firm. "When trust blinds you to the truth. That's when it stops being love and starts being control." Applause followed, not thunderous, but steady and heartfelt. Caroline stepped off the stage, realizing she had found not just healing, but a mission. Her mission grew quickly. Articles she wrote were published in major outlets. Her words quoted in discussions about financial awareness and women's empowerment. She was invited to panels alongside lawyers, psychologists, and advocates. Some called her brave, others called her fierce, but Caroline simply thought of herself as awake. One evening, after a particularly emotional panel, she sat in her dressing room with Anna, who had accompanied her for support. Anna poured them both tea, smiling faintly. "Do you realize what you're doing?" Caroline shook her head. "I'm just telling my story." Anna leaned closer. "No, you're changing theirs. You're giving women tools to protect themselves before it's too late." Caroline looked down at her tea, her reflection rippling in the surface. For years, she had believed her voice only belonged on the pages of novels. Now she understood it could also be a shield, for herself and for others. That night, she opened her journal again, writing a new line. Survival is personal. Empowerment is communal. The more Caroline spoke, the more resistance she met. Not everyone celebrated her. Online critics accused her of exaggeration, of turning personal pain into publicity. Anonymous comments tried to dismiss her as bitter, as vindictive. At first, the words stung, reopening wounds she thought had healed. One night, she scrolled too long, reading post after post until tears blurred her vision. But then Rachel called, her voice steady. Caroline, for every critic, there are 100 women thanking you. Don't let the noise drown that out. The next morning, Caroline sat at her desk, staring at her laptop. She began drafting a new piece, this one directly addressing the criticism. Speaking up isn't revenge, she wrote. It's refusing to be silenced. It's reclaiming a story someone else tried to rewrite. When the article was published, the backlash didn't disappear, but the support grew louder, stronger. Letters poured in, handwritten, heartfelt, thanking her for the courage to say what others couldn't. Caroline realized then that her story was no longer just her own. It had become a spark in a growing fire of voices refusing to be quiet. It was a rainy Thursday evening when Caroline saw him again. She had just finished speaking at a women's finance summit and was stepping into the lobby when Mark appeared near the entrance. For a moment her breath caught. He looked thinner, his once perfectly pressed suit hanging loose on his frame. His eyes flickered with something between anger and desperation. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so others wouldn't hear. Caroline, we need to talk. She steadied herself, tightening her grip on her bag. There's nothing left to say. His jaw clenched. You ruined me. She raised her chin, unflinching. No, Mark. You ruined yourself. I just stopped letting you drag me down with you. His nostrils flared, his hand twitching as if he wanted to reach for her arm, but he didn't. People passed around them, eyes curious, footsteps echoing on marble floors. Caroline stepped back, her voice calm but sharp. Stay out of my way. And for the first time, she saw him falter, shoulders sagging under the weight of his own undoing. Without another word, she walked past him, leaving raindrops and silence in her wake. That night, Caroline sat by her window, the city lights blurred by the rain outside. Seeing Mark again had shaken something in her, but not in the way she expected. She didn't feel fear. She didn't feel longing. What she felt was closure. The man she once adored was no longer the figure in her life. He was only a shadow of choices gone wrong. She sipped her tea slowly, listening to the hum of the city below, and let the calm seep into her bones. Picking up her journal, she wrote, Strength isn't about never being hurt. It's about knowing when not to bleed for someone who cut you. She closed the book and leaned back, allowing herself a long breath. For weeks, she had been living in fight mode, bracing for the next blow, the next attack. But now she realized she didn't have to brace anymore. The worst had passed. The storm had broken. And though she still carried scars, she carried them as proof, not of defeat, but of survival. Days later, Caroline stood on another stage, this time at a university auditorium filled with young women eager to hear her story. As she spoke, she noticed one student in the front row scribbling furiously in her notebook, her brow furrowed, her eyes wide with recognition. Afterward, the girl approached her, voice trembling. Ms. Whitman, my boyfriend. He handles everything. The accounts, the bills. I thought that was love, but now I'm not so sure. Caroline placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Love should never mean ignorance. You have the right to know, to be part of every decision. Don't give away your sight in the name of trust. The girl nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Caroline watched her walk away, her chest tightening with both sorrow and hope. She had once been blind too, but now her words could help others see. And in that moment, Caroline understood the true weight of her journey. It wasn't just survival. It was planting seeds so that others would never have to fight the same storm alone. Caroline's story soon reached far beyond New York. National outlets picked up her interviews, dubbing her the voice of financial resilience. Invitations flooded in, from talk shows to policy forums, from women's shelters to corporate conferences. Each stage was different, but her message was the same. Protect your power. Protect your future. At first, the attention overwhelmed her. She was an author who had once written in the quiet solitude of her brownstone, never imagining her words would echo across the country. But as she stood before audiences, she felt something new: purpose. After one keynote, a retired judge approached her, eyes glistening. "You remind women that silence is the strongest weapon abusers have. Thank you for breaking it." Caroline bowed her head in gratitude. Recognition mattered less than the ripple effect. Every time a woman walked away from her speech with her eyes wide open, every time a girl scribbled notes with determination, Caroline knew she was reshaping futures. Mark had tried to silence her, but now her voice reached farther than he could ever imagine. But national recognition came with heavier shadows. Reporters began digging into her past, not always to uplift, sometimes to scrutinize. Articles dissected her marriage, her finances, her trust documents. Critics claimed she was exploiting her pain for profit. One magazine ran the headline, "From betrayal to branding. Is Caroline Whitman selling her scars?" Caroline read it once, her chest tightening, then closed the page. That night she called Anna, exhaustion lining her voice. "Am I doing the right thing?" Anna didn't hesitate. "Caroline, the truth doesn't become less true because some people twist it. You're saving lives with your words. That matters more than their headlines." Caroline leaned against her window, staring at the skyline. She thought about the women who had written her letters, the girl at the university, the quiet tears in the audience. She realized she couldn't carry everyone's approval, but she could carry her own conviction. And that was enough. With that conviction, Caroline began shaping her next chapter deliberately. She founded an initiative, the Whitman Foundation, dedicated to teaching financial literacy to women in vulnerable marriages. Workshops launched in libraries, community centers, and universities. Volunteer lawyers joined to teach the basics of asset protection. Accountants explained the importance of shared visibility, and Caroline herself told her story with unflinching honesty. The foundation grew faster than she expected, drawing donations and support from across the country. At one event, a woman in her 60s clasped Caroline's hands, her voice breaking. "If I had known this years ago, I wouldn't have lost everything in my divorce. You're giving women what I never had." Tears burned Caroline's eyes, but she smiled. She had once been a woman whose life seemed like a fairy tale, destroyed by betrayal. Now she was a woman turning that betrayal into a beacon. And in building that legacy, she was finally stepping out of Mark's shadow for good. Months later, Caroline walked through Central Park on a crisp autumn morning, the leaves painting the ground gold and red. She paused at her favorite bench, the one she had sat on in the early days after Mark left, when fear and betrayal had weighed heavy on her chest. Now, as she sat with her journal open, the air felt lighter. She had built something beyond survival, a foundation, a movement, a voice that mattered. Strangers still stopped her sometimes, women, students, even men, thanking her for teaching them the value of awareness and independence. She smiled politely, always humbled, but deep inside she marveled at how far she had come. Once, her life had revolved around a man's whispered promises. Now it revolved around her own strength and the lives she was helping to change. Scribbling into her journal, she wrote, "I am not what he tried to make me. I am what I chose to become." One evening, Caroline was invited to speak at a gala honoring women who had transformed adversity into leadership. As she stood at the podium in a navy gown, chandeliers glittering above her, she thought of the night she first discovered Mark's secrets, the way her world had crumbled in the silence of their brownstone. Her voice carried across the room, calm yet resolute. "Trust is a gift, but it should never come at the cost of your freedom. Betrayal is painful, but silence is worse. We don't get to choose every storm, but we do get to choose who we become afterward." The audience rose to their feet in applause, and for a moment Caroline simply stood there, breathing in the sound. She wasn't just telling a story anymore. She was living proof that pain could be rewritten into power. And that, she realized, was her greatest victory. Late that night, back in her apartment, Caroline curled up by the window with a cup of tea. The city hummed outside, alive with endless stories, but hers had finally reached a quiet ending. She didn't feel triumphant in the loud, fiery way she once imagined. Instead, she felt steady, like a ship that had weathered a brutal storm and now sailed on calm waters. She thought of Mark, not with anger, not with longing, but with a distant clarity. He was part of her story, but not the end of it. Closing her eyes, she whispered to herself, "Peace is the truest victory." Then she opened her journal one last time and wrote the words she hoped every reader, every listener, every woman would carry with them. Strength isn't surviving the storm. It's learning how to own the sky afterward. With that, Caroline closed the book, her heart no longer heavy, her life her own again, whole, unbroken and free.